Hi folks, I'm Dave Isaacs, and this is a lesson on chord vocabulary. Now, you're probably familiar with your basic, what we might call the cowboy chords, your open position A, C, D, E, and G. Now, you may already have noticed that if we're thinking about capital letters, that means we're leaving out B and we're leaving out F, plus there's all the sharps and flats to think about. But we will get to that, and that's part of the point of this lesson. The main thing that you want to understand to start with, and this is really going to be the key to unlocking the entire fretboard, is that anything you can play down here in the open position, you can play elsewhere. This is part of the point of bar chords, and while this is not a bar chord lesson, that's going to relate to what we're talking about today. The main idea is that the guitar neck is a straight line, and I don't mean just physically, I mean in terms of our concept of a scale and how the notes move. So if I play up the neck, up meaning this direction with the pitch rising, on the A string, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. This might sound stupidly obvious, but what that's illustrating is that as you move along the neck, the pitch gets higher, and we can predict the increment of how much, depending on how many frets you went. Well, that's fundamental, but think about what that means. That means that if I take an A chord, I can just move this shape over. I just have to know how far to get from A to B. Now, a couple of things I should mention. With this A chord, I am using middle ring pinky. Lots of people play index middle ring for an A chord. Some people put the index in the middle. My hand likes middle ring pinky because how it fits. That's an aside. I do really believe that fingerings are not absolute, and the proportion and shape of your hand, even though we all basically have the same hands, does impact the fingerings that you're going to choose. Is this finger longer? Is that finger shorter? So this fits my hand better. And the thing is, we're also recognizing that if I take this 5-note chord and move up my A shape, I've only moved 3 of the 5 notes. Now that's a cool chord, but it's not a B chord yet. I've only moved this much. Now it's worth recognizing that the 3 notes I'm holding are what we would call an A triad, and this is the foundation of the chord. These are the 3 primary notes. You don't even have to be able to spell the chord to understand this, but just to know that when I play 5 notes, I'm playing the note A twice, and the note E twice, and the note C sharp once. So the chord itself is just A, C sharp, and E. And there's a variety of ways we can do that. For our purposes right now, I'm just pointing out how these 3 notes alone, minus the open strings, are already a complete A chord. It's not the complete sound I want if I'm strumming. So it depends on the context. So it's important for you to know that these 3 notes moved up, if I play just those 3 strings, are still a B chord. I'm just going to have to account for those open strings that didn't move. This is where the bar comes in. However, we don't necessarily even need the bar right away. This is one reason for my fingering for the A chord of middle ring pinky, because if I slide this over, my index finger is free, and so I can reach over here and play the 2nd fret of the high E string. This is now a 4-note major chord shape. It happens to double a different note. But now look at what happens here. We can play this as a 4-note chord as it is. I can strum it and it sounds full. I am allowing my middle finger to block the A string a little bit, but I'm also paying attention to the strings I hit over here. So this is a new form, technically, but it's just made up of the familiar A shape plus adding this note over here. And if I think of this in terms of triads, 3-note forms, we already know this is a triad. Well, if I omit the 4th string and play this shape, this is a complete B chord also. This would not be the voicing you would choose if you're strumming, say, an acoustic guitar alone and you're looking for a big sound, because it's not a big sound. But if you're trying to blend in with another guitar that's maybe already playing with the big sound, this is a great way to go. This is also a movable shape. So I can take this 3-note chord and move up a half step and get a C, and move up another whole step and get a D, another whole step and get an E, half step get an F, whole step get a G, and whole step get an A. That's following the same pattern that I followed walking up the A string, which was A to B is a whole step, B to C is a 1-fret half step. This is information you should know. C to D is a whole step. D to E is a whole step. E to F is a half. That's your other 1-fret distance. Then F, G is a whole step, G, A is a whole step. So you want to remember E, F, and B, C are the half steps. This is what allows you to figure out how far to move. So I know that if B and C are a half step apart, then I only have to move this chord up a single fret to get to a C. And the same applies for this triad: whole step to B, half step C, whole step D, whole step E, half step F, whole step G. So remember those two half steps, B, C, and E, F. That's going to be important everywhere. This will lead us to bar chords, yes, and we could do that this way with 4 fingers. And notice this is the complete 3-finger A formation with the added bar. And I'll just mention as an aside that a lot of people struggle with bar chords because they think they're supposed to squeeze. Your power on this formation is actually in these 3 fingers together. That's a strong grip. I just need to drop my wrist enough that this knuckle is in front of the fingerboard. My index finger can point at the ceiling, and then when I bring this finger in, I'm really just pinching the high E string with the edge of my index finger and bringing the fingertip in to get the bass. I am not required to hold down 5 notes. That's not to say you shouldn't be able to do this. This is going to come up in your playing as well, odds are. But for the purposes of this B chord, and the same goes for this B minor, that bar is only getting 2 notes, and that's important to know. If we continue to deconstruct, to break that big chord down into small chords, this triad here, you probably already know how we get a power chord here on strings 5, 4, 3. B, C, whole half step, C, D, whole step, D, E, whole step, E, F, whole step, E, F, half step, there's your 1 fret, F, G is a whole step, G, A. You may know this already. I really do think that if you don't know your way around the neck, just memorizing the notes on that A string are a great way to start, because it will reinforce to you, not just in terms of the fretboard map, like reading off the tab, but your visual distances where those half steps are. We can use this same idea with any of the other open chords, but the one you're going to use the most often is the E. Now, just as with the A chord, if I want to move up to an F, I just have to shift the form up, but if I move the 3 notes I'm holding, this once again is an E triad, not the complete E chord we tend to use. So if I move the triad, I get 3 notes that move and 3 that don't. Great sound, but not an F chord. If I'm just playing 3 notes, well, that is an F chord. And so here's a new version of F you may not know. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange my fingers, not unlike what we did with A. So I have ring on the A string, pinky on the D string, and middle on the G string. Index is now free. Notice my hand position. The wrist is dropped, but I'm not forward like this, and I am not pinching my thumb and my finger together. I'm going to take these 3 fingers. I'm going to get comfortable on my fingertips. I'm going to glide up this half step. And notice once again, I've got just enough bend in the wrist that my knuckle, the line of the knuckles is ahead of the fingerboard, and my index finger is basically pointing at the ceiling. I just bring it in, and then we end up pinching 2 strings inside the bass segment of the finger and bringing the fingertip in for the low note. So again, not getting 6 strings, just 3. This is a finger independence question, but I really think you will find, and this is a trap a lot of people fall into, that if you get this part of the bar chord comfortable, then this part's a lot easier. Where your finger lands is important too. You might notice my fingertip is not level with the string. That's because I want to find the right spot on this finger to catch those trebles and be able to comfortably lean on that low note. This is making me work too hard, and it's pulling my chord out of tune. That sounds much better. If we go with the idea we walked through on the A chord, breaking things down into triads and getting some of these new shapes, well, we get the one I pointed out to you already, the string 5, 4, 3 triad. But we also have this, 4, 3, 2, and you might likely finger that ring, middle, and index. You might know this as a little F chord. You should be aware that if I play this with the open E string, I don't have F major, I have F major 7. That's a topic for another lesson. So if we're dealing with these partial chords, these smaller voicings, these triads, you want just these 3. This is also movable. F, remember F to G is 2 frets, whole step. G to A, whole step. A to B, whole step. B to C, 1 fret half step. C to D, D to E. Again, that's just the triad. If I come back to what you may think of as the little F, and this is the way a lot of people learn the F chord the first time, is with this little bar here on the 1st fret. Well, same idea that I am pinching the strings, but my angle's different this time. So this really is a little more straight onto the flat of the finger, and I find it works better if I bar 3 strings rather than 2, even if I only want a 3-note chord. And look at that. Here is a triad shape on 3, 2, 1. Does this move? Yes, it does. F to G, G to A to B, B to C, C to D, D to E. This is not a complicated idea, and if you can slide bar chords, you know how this works already. But as I said, this is not a bar chord lesson. This is a mapping the fingerboard lesson. So if you are familiar with your bar chords, this gives you an opportunity to really solidify your map by reinforcing in your mind where the bass notes are. Let's back up for a second. We're talking about expanding your chord vocabulary through taking your cowboy chords and sliding them up with or without a bar, or breaking that chord down into 2-note, 3-note, 4-note, versions of the chord. Slightly different sounds. All of these are A chords. But they're bringing out different notes. We could talk about the theory of inversions and different triads, but the thing I want you to consider is that there's a melody aspect to this. So it sounds one way if I'm playing 3 notes and bringing out the 3rd string A. Ba-da, ba-ba-da, ba-ba. It's another sound if I'm playing 5 notes and bringing out the high E. So even if I go from here to a D chord, we now have a melody move of ba-da-da-da-dee. And this is maybe the other biggest idea you should keep in mind, is that as guitarists, we fall into a trap of thinking about boxes. The E box, the G box. That's fine. It's a great way to learn. It helps you memorize these things. But piano players understand that a chord is 3 notes. You can add a 4th note, you can add a 5th note, and you can see, looking at the keyboard, the distance from one note to another. That's not to say that piano players don't remember patterns, but they do recognize that a chord is not a monolithic block, but a collection of notes that can be rearranged or moved around. Guitarists have a harder time with this. So you want to expand your concept of chords to include both the bigger idea of this is what the chord is and we combine these letters with I can take a single shape and not look at this as one thing, but as multiple possibilities. And those multiple possibilities come from working within the shape, playing different combinations of notes. And of course, if I use my fingers, I get even more. Like in this case, I'm playing 5, 4, and 2. That's still an A chord, even though I'm leaving things out. When we start moving up, these partial shapes can be moved also. Or if I want to add this to a bar, I'm not obliged to hold all these notes if I'm only going to play these 3. Now, it might be confusing to you to say, all right, well, is this the same as this? They're not identical. The sounds are not the same. The visual patterns are not the same. But if you think of the big bar chord as the large collection of notes that we're going to extract notes from, and that from that bar chord or that bigger chord, you can pull X number of notes and you only need the ones you're holding. These are still basic bar chords. They're not new shapes, but the sound is different. Obviously, this raises the question, there are a lot of possibilities here. How do I possibly work through all of this? And the answer is, you don't really, or at least, if you are a highly organized person, you can make a list of all the permutations, draw the boxes, and practice them all, and try to memorize them like you're working off a glossary. That might work for you, but I think the more practical way to do this is to take a song, or a backing track, starting with something with just a handful of chords. Let's say it's a C, F, and a G. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the familiar C, F, and G, and look for other ways to approach this. So maybe I'm going to play C by taking my C bar chord and using this triad fingering over here. So that's strings 1, 2, 3, fret 3, fret 5, fret 5. And maybe I want to play the F chord here using just the 3 upper strings of the big bar and the G like this. So now instead of, we get, this could be a secondary guitar part that goes along with somebody strumming. Or maybe I want a thicker sound with the notes in the middle. Maybe I'm going to move up this A to get this C. Play it as a bar with one finger, and then move this up to F up here and G up here. Or maybe from this C I'm going to drop to this F, and I could move this up for this G, or I could switch to this one. Hopefully what you're starting to see is that what I'm doing here is not just learning new shapes. I'm looking for ways to make chord progressions more melodic, because when I change the shape, it brings out different notes, or at least it gives me different melody options to play with. You should be able to see how no matter where you are as a player, no matter what your vocabulary is, that this is an idea you can extrapolate from, that you can take anything you can play down here, you can use your knowledge of the chromatic scale, meaning the notes on the A string with the connecting sharps and flats filled in, so you're clear on where your half steps are. And anything you can play down here, you can play elsewhere, and you don't have to know every single version, you just have to know how to look for them. There's a lot of geometry to this, and there's lots of possibilities, but you need to just not make yourself crazy trying to memorize everything to start with. Just find things that sound good. Practice over songs. Practice over tracks. If you are the kind of person that does well with drills, then organize those drills. If you're not then just go right to applying small pieces of information in a limited way to a single song and keep doing it. And I promise you that this will blow the entire guitar neck open for you in terms of knowing your way around and being able to navigate. I'm Dave Isaacs. I hope you get a lot out of this lesson. Thanks for watching.